call this meeting to order for Bennington Select Board for Monday, January 28th. Our chair had to be in Montpelier today, so I'm going to chair the meeting tonight. Chris, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda tonight are minutes. We have minutes of January 12th, which was a Saturday budget session.
I'll move to approve as presented.
Okay, is there a second? Is there any discussion on those minutes? All those in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. We have the minutes from Monday, January 14th, which was a regular select board meeting.
I'll move those are approved as well.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on those minutes? All those in favor? Okay, that's unanimous on that. And the last minutes are Saturday, January 19th, which was our final budget session.
I'll move those are approved as well.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on those minutes? All those in favor? And that's unanimous also. Thank you, gentlemen. We've circulated the warrants for signature. Anyone have any questions on the warrants tonight?
I don't.
Jason? No. Greg? No.
Good.
Chris?
Good.
No, ma'am.
Okay. I just had one question, Stuart. On page 5, almost to the bottom, that financial operations project billings, what are those projects?
Yes, the financial operations is a state department that takes payments for a host of projects. In this case, we're looking at a payment for the Benmont Avenue Bridge or the Hunt Street Bridge local share as that moves forward. The major payment is for the water line project that is FEMA eligible on the Woodford Bridge that has just recently been completed, and we've been paying relatively large amounts over the last, I think it's 3 months.
Okay. And then on page 9, the very bottom, New Horizon final phone bill, are we switching our phone service?
Yes, we have moved to Sobernet.
Okay.
And New Horizons will no longer be servicing us.
Okay. That's all I have. Okay, moving on to the next item, our citizens. Are there any citizens this evening that would like to bring something before the board that is not on our agenda? Lindy, you want to step up to the microphone for the folks at home, and please introduce yourself. No sign in, and you don't have to bend over or anything, you can just speak.
I'm here on behalf of Kevin's Sports Pub and Restaurant, my husband and I, and we were a little concerned about something that we read in the paper last week in regards to a possibility of closing establishments at midnight versus 2 a.m., which is the state law. And we're just here to say that Friday and Saturday nights, we do have music venue, and we pay musicians to play, typically till 1 o'clock, but sometimes getting everyone out. They're sometimes still there till 2 o'clock. We have a lot of folks that come when other establishments close, like restaurant workers and such, coming in after Pangea and some of the other places come in. So we find it would be very difficult to our business to be closing any earlier than the state does allow.
Okay. We have not made a final decision on that. So that is, something that's still being considered or not considered. We haven't.
Right, and we
had a discussion, basically.
Important to just, bring our opinion.
And I certainly appreciate hearing from you.
And even after concerts, I was talking to Matthew Perry today after the Vermont Art Exchange, after the concerts and such, many people and the band members and such come up. And we have not had any problems in our 14 years, so we don't have any blemishes to speak of. So we would like to make sure that that doesn't happen. That is.
And that was one of the things we discussed, not punishing everyone for one person's or one establishment's mistake. So it's still something that we're considering, or, it's on the back burner right now. So,
well, if there's anything that we can do to help make sure it doesn't happen to ours, we would love to be a part of that conversation.
We will make you part of that conversation. Thanks, Lindy. Are there any other citizens here that want to address something that's not on our agenda this evening? Okay. Next item is the FY12 financial audit presentation, and we have Mr. Love here from Love Cody.
Steve, I was telling you on the way in, this is my favorite time of the year.
I understand that, rightfully so. It'd be more exciting.
Have a seat. Do we need to turn that microphone around, or? Thanks. Okay, floor is yours.
Well, thank you, and I'll start by, although these aren't the final, so the auditor's report isn't signed as yet, just remind you that the only thing that really belongs to Love Cody and Company is the 2 pages that's our independent auditor's report. We just have a couple of things we're working on to issue it final, which we're really in a position to do at this point, and we're comfortable with that. And more adjustments that'll be affecting the financial statements.
Okay.
So, having said that, I'll assume, as we've done in prior years, sort of an overview of the basic financials and see if there's any questions. I would again suggest that as far as getting a pretty good understanding of the statements, the management's discussion and analysis, which is the pages 3 through 11 of the statements, is always a good place to start because it tends to give an overview of the statements and describe in more layman's terms, if you will. And that's put together by management. It's not truly audited by us, but we do compare it to the financial statements to make sure it's all consistent with the financial statements. So as far as my comments, I'll just start on page 12, which is a statement of net assets. And I'm going to remind you that that's a statement that with the advent of GASB 54 or 34 puts the whole town on an accrual basis, both the governmental funds and the business type activities, so that everything is full accrual, all of the debt shown, all of the capital assets of the town are shown. And from that perspective, the governmental activities, which includes primarily the general fund, but also the community development and other special revenue funds, total assets for the governmental activities were just over $19 million for the year. That's an increase of about $800,000 compared to last year. Liabilities are up about $4.6 million to $7.5, and it's clear that the lion's share of that is the line of credit that was taken out with respect to the Hurricane Irene expenditures that are still in the air in terms of FEMA reimbursement. And throughout the statements, you'll see that obviously the biggest impact on these statements this year, this fiscal year, not this year, is in fact the effects of Hurricane Irene, and we're still waiting to hear how that's going to shake out as far as the last pieces of it. The other piece that's still waiting on the audit is the single audit, and we're kind of intentionally pushing that back a little bit to get the best fix we can on the FEMA money, since that's a really large piece of the federal expenditures this year. You guys aren't alone in wondering what's going to be reimbursed and what isn't. We're seeing that in other municipalities, so we have a lot of single audit work that's going to be happening in February and March this year, but all has to be done by March 31st, so if there's still open questions on whether an expenditure will be reimbursed or not, we'll report as federal whatever we know is reimbursable by the time we're done the single audit. If there's some that were expended this year that get approved in the next year, then we'll just add those to the next year's CFA and put a note in there describing that those expenditures were actually incurred a year earlier. But
okay.
So that's how that'll play out on the single audit. In total, the net assets, so the liabilities taken away from the assets of the governmental activities, amount to $11,700, and you'll see that the unrestricted is a negative amount. Normally we don't like to see that, but again, that's because right now we're still sitting on a fair bit of Irene expenditures that are waiting for the final word for approval on getting those paid for by the feds and or the state, which I think the feeling is the lion's share of that will ultimately be reimbursed, but until you get the check, hard to say.
We don't know.
On the business type activities, we ended the year with just over $14 million in assets, liabilities of about $6.6 million for net assets of $7,500,000. Not as much effect from Irene and the business type activities, although some of the water line damage did incur costs in the water fund, so that one also has the water fund has some pretty significant impacts from Irene as well this year. The next page is page 13, the statement of activities. Again, this is presented on a full accrual basis for the town as a whole, again broken down by governmental activities and business type activities. The governmental activities had total expenditures of about, or expenses since they're on the accrual basis, of just over $16 million. That's comparing to about $12.3 million last year, but again, you'll see the one line item in there which is separately stated just because it's so significant, the Highways and Roads Hurricane Irene flood expense at $4.6 million. So that had a dramatic impact on the governmental activities. Business-type activities were actually only up about $200,000 from the prior year, and again, that's Irene-related with respect to the water fund. And going across the expenses there, we break up program revenues, any revenues that are specific to a given program or capital acquisition, to see what part of our expenses they cover. And the big jump there is in the capital grants and contributions, which went from about $299,000 last year to $1,776,000 this year, and again, that being primarily Irene-related grants of about $1.4 million there. To the right of that statement, you'll see the net cost of services, and for the general governmental activities, that's just under $13 million. And at the bottom, general revenues are what we need to offset that to get to our final net assets. Property taxes at about $8,600,000, and other revenues taking it to $9,092,000, for a change in net assets on the governmental activities, a decrease of $3,841,000, which brought us from the beginning just over $15.5 million down to $11,700,000. And on the business type activities, actually had positive on the water side and the sewer to $935,000, and then our general grants that covered those brought it up to $1,180,000 for an increase in the proprietary funds for business type activities for the year.
Anybody have any questions?
Everyone's still awake? All right, so that's the government-wide statements, and then I'll just briefly touch on the fund financial statements, and that was the more traditional view. Looking at page 14, the General Governmental Activities Fund ended the year just under $3,400,000 for assets, liabilities of $5,500,000. And again, that'll tell you right there that you're ending the year with an overall fund deficit of just over $2 million. Again, related to Irene, in this case, that's reflected in the $3,683,000 of line of credit for a liability in the general fund. There are some grants receivable. That's a big increase this year, $1 million, where there were none last year, and that's again Irene-related grants that we knew we were getting as of June 30, 2012.
Just have a question on that for Stu. On those grants receivable, given the 4.2-ish that we would hope to get from the federal government, how much of that 4.2 can be offset by the grants received of just under 1.1, if any?
None of it. Remember, we spent. Remember, we borrowed $5 million.
Right.
We ended up spending, because of the work required, just over $5 million. As we received eligibility payments and insurance payments, those were paid back against the line of credit.
From these grants? From
the grants, yes. And so what you see is what's left that we're hoping to achieve from FEMA for most of the river work.
Okay. I was afraid that was the answer, but I thought I'd ask.
I am sorry to tell you.
I figured it was.
If it's in the receivable, it's been recognized as revenue, so that's not a part of the piece that we're still hoping to get. So. And going across the line then, the Community Development Fund is the next largest of our funds, and that does show an increase in notes receivable of $376,000, and that's a net balance between new grants that were dispersed over $500,000 and collections on other notes receivable that had been outstanding. In total, the Community Development Fund has just over $3,200,000 in assets and net assets of $2,300,000. And DIC, being the smaller of our special revenues, just has a amount due from other funds of $21,000 and restricted fund balance of $21,000. So in total, our governmental funds just over $6.6 million in the assets, and total net assets or fund balances of $160,000 at year end. Okay. Going to page 16, the Statement of Revenues, Expenditures, and Changes in Fund Balances. Again, just highlighting the effects of Irene here, intergovernmental revenues, I'm sorry, the Hurricane Irene grants and assistance as far as what's been received and recognized, $1,384,000 as of June 30th, and Hurricane Irene flood expense that you see down there at $4,618,849 within the general fund, and there's also Hurricane Irene expense in the water fund. So that gets you up to your $5+ million of cost that Mother Nature threw our way. So that's really the big change in the general fund, which gives us to a deficiency of revenues over expenditures of $3,700,000. We did issue some long-term debt to help offset that, and also some operating transfers in for $170,000. But in the long and short of it, our fund balance of the general fund decreased $3,345,000 this year, and again, hoping to recoup some of that in 2013. And that's basically it for the governmental funds as far as anything real exciting. Moving on to the, okay, so it wasn't that exciting. It wasn't that.
I'm riveted. This is fantastic. Keep up the good work.
So on page 18, the proprietary fund statement of net assets, again, that's pretty much stated the same way as it is on the government-wide statements, except you have a column for each of the 3 funds that make up the business-type activities, and the lion's share of that being in the water fund. That had just under $10 million in total assets, liabilities of about $6.6 million, so $3 million for net assets in the water fund. Sewer fund, about $4 million in assets and $4.1 million in net assets for the very few liabilities recognized on that one. You can see the water department did have the line of credit of just under $390,000, which again is Irene related, as opposed to, that's not there in a typical year. And the parking meter fund coming in at just under $400,000 for assets and net assets. So in total, ended the year at about $14,161,000 for assets and $7,500 in fund balance. And again, those numbers are, well, the assets are up because of the receivables, but the in total, a little improvement from prior year for those funds. And on page 19, really coming to a close here. Once we get through this one, I think that's about it. On this one, the water fund, you can see actually ended the year in pretty good shape with total revenues of $1,866,000, expenditures of $1,398,000 for an operating income of just under $470,000. And then with FEMA storm assistance and grants of $1,200,000 already recognized, we have a positive income before transfers of $1,118,000, recognizing that a lot of those are then put into the balance sheet as assets and capital improvements. So that's why you see such a big fund balance increase in that particular fund. And sewer fund, more typically comparable to the prior year at $1,565,000 for revenues, operating income of about $173,000, and a change in net assets of $91,000. And I would point out that for both of those funds in the past, we've had a decrease in net assets at the end of the year. We've increased our water rates a little bit, and this is helping on that side, as well as the FEMA money for the assets there. But it's a positive sign to know that for both of those funds that they actually had an increase in net assets for the year, which we've kind of been pushing for a while, so that we can hopefully accumulate money over time for infrastructure as it needs to be replaced down the road. So, and the next, yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Steve, that's where I've got just a couple questions, and I know I know this is accrual based and it doesn't necessarily translate to the budget process, but if I could ask you a couple questions to correlate some budget questions I've had over the last year, particularly last summer's. I'm going to use the water fund as an example, but the same would hold true of the sewer fund. And just your last comments were the perfect segue, because one of the things this board has done pretty well over the last 5 years is make some rather unpopular decisions in terms of rate increases, so that we were generating increasing cash balances with the intent of down the road, as we need to upgrade infrastructure that is in many cases at least decades and in some cases close to a century old, we could do that out of reserved cash as opposed to the issuance of more debt. And my question is this, and I'm asking you because I frankly don't feel like I got a good answer over the summer when we spent a few meetings, we spent some time on this. When I look at the budget for the water department, this is a cash-based budget and not an accrual-based budget, and I want to see if you can translate it back to me to the last statement. We show revenues for the current year we're in right now, which is 7/1/12 to 6/30/13 of $2.156 million, and we show a corresponding expected expenditure of the same amount. Every line item of the 200 or so that are in that budget are cash, with the exception, of course, of depreciation, which in this budget is an expenditure of $315,000. I look at that and think, assuming we came in right on budget, and of course there's going to be deviations in income, there's going to be deviations in expenses, but if everything went swimmingly and we hit every line item on target, shouldn't the net result be, in terms of cash reserved for water fund activities, an increase next year of $315,000?
If all of your revenues and all of your expenditures, save for depreciation, were cash and they hit the budget, then yes, you would end the year with 300.
We should see an increase in cash attributable to water activities of that.
Correct.
Okay. I was told otherwise, but I was told I also didn't understand it, so I'm...
Again, that's if, under that scenario.
Under that scenario.
Came in as budgeted, so you collected everything that you billed.
Everything came in as budgeted. There's one non-cash item called depreciation. The difference should be, when you look at your fund balances next year, an increase in cash. And it would be cash available for future projects as a water fund reserve.
And that also assumes that your cash basis budget didn't have infrastructure or any capital improvements.
Well, in the cash-based budget, it does have, as part of the $2.156 million in expenditures, principal payments of $291,540 on various debt instruments that we've issued, and interest payments of $205,680 that is included in that cash in, cash out analysis that this board, in that case sitting as the water board, analyzed last May for the current year that we're in, which is July 1/12 to June 30th, 13.
So yeah, those would be even on that scale.
Okay. But also remember, Jason, that in that budget are expenditures for capital improvements, the Northside Drive water main replacement project. That's an expenditure that's going to be shown differently than cash, and I'll leave Steve to explain it.
Well, that's why I was saying if there are no capital items in there, because those will, although I guess if you budgeted the capital items and you spent that much on them in cash, then it's true, your budget would still yield that. Depreciation would be a net cash remaining.
Well, not to deviate and steal from Steve's thunder, but
steal away.
Those projects, in fact, are listed in this budget.
Yeah, they're shown as an expenditure, but, and please, I'm not the finance director, nor do I pretend to play one in real life.
Obviously, I don't pretend to be an accountant, and I've been told 4 times now that I just don't understand this. So before I leave this board in a few weeks, I'd love to leave understanding something.
Like a light goes on, it'd be great. I think that, you know, when we budget for the capital projects, they are actually shown in the audit differently than necessarily a cash expenditure. The assets change, correct, but depreciation also changes because you've been, and Steve, please rescue me from this. Oh, thank you. I'm not going to work for Cody and Love anytime soon, I can tell you that. So that, I mean, that it's not directly apples to apples.
Well, right, but that's not
I
the
tend
question.
to agree with you,
That's not
though.
the question I asked, though. The
I
question
tend to
I
agree
asked
with you.
is in a budget that we analyzed that shows 2.156, to be exact, $2,156,560 in revenue, nearly all of it from water bills, but some bulk sales augment that ever so slightly. We receive anything on the receipt side of that budget is actual cash. That all receipts are. Right. That comes in. That's revenue earned by the town of Bennington in its business selling water, mostly to homes and businesses, but also some bulk sales. And then we have a corresponding 2.5-page, probably 75 to 80 line items, which include those capital expenditures that you're talking about, that show a corresponding amount of total expenditures of $2,156,560. All of those expenditures, including the expenditures you're talking about, are listed, and those are actual checks written by the town of Bennington to pay for water expenses.
Right.
One line item is an expense for depreciation, which is non-cash, this year listed at the year we're in currently, to accumulate $315,000 of depreciation. That non-cash expense is the difference of cash received and cash expended. And I'm trying to look at it because I was frankly brought up short, and like I said, perhaps you're giving a good explanation and I don't get it, and I'll be the first to admit there's probably many things I don't get. But this appears to be relatively simple arithmetic, that if we have an amount of cash coming in and a correspondingly less amount of cash going out within a proprietary fund like the water fund, the difference ought to be reserved cash capital to be used for future cash needs, whether it's a project or whatever it may be. And I'm concerned that when I try to get a question as to how much, and I understand we commingle our funds the way, and that's a terrible word to use, we don't keep separate checking accounts, but if we look at the auditor, check me if I'm wrong, if we look at the bank statement for the town of Bennington at any given time and it shows X dollars available in cash, we should be able to say, okay, this amount of it is general cash available to the town of Bennington. This portion is applicable really to the sewer fund, which is a proprietary fund and shouldn't be used for non-sewer funds. The same true for the water fund, the same true for the parking fund, and we'd get to the sum total that way. But my point is, and the question was raised 6 or 7 months ago when we were going through this, first through the budget process, and then I think we had some meetings in the summer. I don't think we were meeting here. I think we were meeting over on South Street during those couple meetings, if I recall correctly. I was said, wait a minute, my conclusion looking at this budget is we should have accumulated, or will accumulate in this budget, $315,000 in cash, should be in the bank, should flow through to a financial statement somewhere as part of a fund balance, but there should be a cash accumulation, assuming everything is on target. Obviously, if we don't accumulate, if we don't receive the billings we projected to bill, less billings means less cash received, less savings. If we receive a little bit more and we're heavy on the expenditure side, that should be more cash reserved. And I still don't understand why we can't figure out how we're going, because this board's going to have to know what it's accumulating in cash reserves for future capital projects.
And you're correct. And my answer previously, and I think was at a meeting here, is you have to look at that cash at a point in time. It's cash at year end, June 30th. And in some cases, the water billings have not been entirely collected. So that might be cash at year end, July 31st. Might be a more accurate view of how much cash we have. But that's a matter of timing of when that cash hits the books after billing. But you're right.
Well, I accept that, but what I'm just, at some point, assuming the money eventually comes in, look, I fully understand this part. You know, we don't send out a bill today and get the entire receivable from the thousands of customers we have tomorrow. There's going to be money coming in, but over time, we should see that cash accumulating, and I was concerned that that cash isn't accumulating for water use the way that I think it ought to be, and had thought it was until, for whatever reason, it became clear to me that there was some question as to that point.
Well, over the last 5 years, you are absolutely correct. We have been attempting to catch up to our depreciation, to budget fairly for depreciation. I think in the water fund, we are practically there now. So what you're saying tonight should be true. At the end of 2013, you should see that cash available for the water fund, which would then be a reserve or for expenses at a later date. But for years, we were not budgeting for depreciation, so the depreciation was exceeding what we were billing.
But I'm
or
looking at it
receiving.
not in terms of a fund balance like Steve's attesting to. I'm looking at it more in terms of a statement of cash flows for the year that we did business as a water company, saying to the extent we budgeted for any depreciation, those dollars should have been in a piggy bank somewhere. If there was any depreciation in that budget, the difference between revenue expected and expenditure spent, that difference should be there somewhere. Now, if we weren't budgeting for depreciation, and I don't have the last 6 years of budgets that I've been here for, I could dig them out, but I didn't. And, you know, had a couple other things I was trying to accomplish today, so I failed to do so.
No, but what you're saying tonight is correct. That money should be there at year end for that purpose.
That's all. Sorry to steal your thunder.
Not at all, not at all.
Any other board members have any questions? Hearing none, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Once again.
Sharon, there should be a motion to accept the audit, just for the record.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion to accept the audit as presented.
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the Cultural Town Plan. Greg, I believe this is yours.
That's my baby. Let me get that out here.
If you'd like, you can go to the other side, or you can sit
Oh,
right
I'll
here
sit
where
right
you
here.
are. And
Yes, I mentioned this at a previous meeting. On Sunday, February 10th, from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. at the Mount Anthony Country Club, there's going to be an event that is the result of continuing conversations about our arts and cultural and creative industry in town. We all know that we have museums and galleries and things in town. There are a lot of people who make a living in the creative industry in town. And when you start drawing the circle outward, you include media, you include suppliers and vendors and whatnot. So the conversation, which started in the Better Bennington Corporation Arts Committee, started to grow larger than the BBC's area of concern, which is downtown. And it kind of took on the color of what the VCRD community meetings had going last March 15th. And there was a meeting in this room on the arts and cultural community. So we started to dig up those invitation lists and get people involved, and we decided to have this summit to try and get parties involved. The BCRC has been helping us with organizational parts of it, and one suggestion was that we work towards the idea of creating a cultural town plan. And so again, that's where the BCRC comes in. They have written just about all the town plans. They've never done a cultural town plan. We're very excited at putting something like that together to try and supplement our whole economic development strategy that everybody's so focused on of late. If you remember in the Council on Rural Development conversations, they picked, the people who came picked 4 groups that went on with work groups, which we have going on currently. But Paul's one comment at the end was, if you want to do any more, go ahead. You know, he gave examples of Rutland and other cities that have taken on similar initiatives. So in that light, basically, I want to ask the board for basically consensus or motion to sanction this as a town event, with the idea that hopefully down the line we can come back with a proposal for an official town policy on how to move forward. And the subtitle, it's the Bennington Cultural Summit, the Arts as an Engine of Economic Development, and see how we can move this forward as a lot of the area around us has done. Berkshire County has a very significant cultural development force going on. Manchester in the mountains is combining with some of the Bennington groups in the Hills Are Alive initiative and things like that. So
Even Brattleboro.
Brattleboro has their Arts Walk going on. We've got First Fridays coming on. So it's all those things that are going on that I think would be much better served to be coordinated and working together. And so there you have it. You've all got a little thing in there that explains the meeting. Everybody is welcome to come. Specifically invited are people who are directly involved with the creative community, whether they're educators or suppliers or artists or venues or sponsors, but certainly, legislators, town staff, anybody who's interested in coming. And we're going to have some workshops to explore and prioritize goals and initiatives and partnerships.
Okay. Any comments from the board? No?
Questions?
At this point, so at this point, you're not asking for any money.
Correct.
You just want our approval to go ahead and
Right. I'd like to be able to tell people
this
is a town-sanctioned initiative. One, it gives it credibility. It gives people a direction when they ask, who's doing this? I'd like to say everybody's doing this, and I'd like to say that the town of Bennington is behind this, and that we would hopefully move forward and come up with something that we could actually have as a concrete direction.
Okay.
It's a no-brainer for me. Are you planning on making a motion, or?
Do we need a motion or just consensus, Stu? Do you
I'd be
think?
happy with consensus. Stuart,
It's Greg's, okay.
It's what Greg wants on this one.
Okay.
I mean, whatever I think lends, if credibility is what you're looking for, whatever lends you the most credibility is what the board should do if they're going to consider it.
I think it should be a motion, so I'll make the motion that we sponsor the Bennington Cultural Summit.
I'll second it.
Okay.
I think we should have our logo, and since it's more than downtown than just the Better Bennington Corporation, if this is what you're putting out.
correct. And I would love to be able to do that. I have the logo and the ability to do that.
Okay. Any other further discussion? All those in favor? And that's unanimous. Good luck.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the Bennington Coalition for the Homeless ballot consideration. Andy, Stu, we get an email that Stuart received from 6 Bank Street, which is the homeless shelter. So, Kendi, you want to go ahead and...
Sure. Well, as you know, the process changed this year for agencies requesting town funds to get on the ballot. Required petitions containing 420 registered voters. We submitted petitions with 551 names, and had hoped that we could get a count throughout the day so we'd know if we came up short. We were hoping the 130 extra names were enough of a cushion, considering there would probably be duplications and unregistered, people who weren't registered. That count wasn't available this year. Other years it has been. They weren't able to give us that this year, and so I found out at 5:30 that we were 33 signatures short. We have been approved by the voters every year for this allocation, and I believe we provide a vital service to this town and that the town needs us. But without the town's support, we cannot continue to do this. I'm asking that you place us on the ballot requesting $25,000 in support of the Bennington Coalition for the Homeless.
Okay. Any board members have any questions?
I would not.
Okay, Tim?
My remarks will be addressed to the petition portion of it. The petition was filed Friday afternoon, and the count wasn't available. We had 3 petitions that were filed. The homeless shelter is the only petition we worked on. And I have a copy of the petition here, and I asked board members to come in and look at it. We had to go through the petition. There was obvious names, like if Chris signed it or Jimmy signed it, that we didn't even check to see if their names were on a checklist. But there were a number of signatures that we couldn't read. There was a large number of duplicates. And when you think you see a duplicate, you got to go back and find it to make sure it is a duplicate. I don't think Kenny has any idea the amount of time that it takes to accurately check the petition. A number of the names, we couldn't read them. We went over to the lister's office to find out who lived at that address to see if we could tie that name to the petition. We gave due diligence to that petition. And we never even got to the hospice petition or Project Independence until the next day because we worked exclusively on hers. During the afternoon, she brought extra names in. And we had to work with those to make sure that they hadn't already signed a petition. And so the saying that the count wasn't available, it wasn't available because it couldn't have been available. And there were a large number of names that were from anywhere from New York City to other towns, Arlington, that you still had to check to make sure they weren't on the list, even though they used that as a mailing address. And so to indicate that it could have been possible if they knew earlier. If we'd had the petition earlier, that would have been a whole different story. So, kind of reminds me of you mow your neighbor's friend and he complains of the noise of the lawnmower. We gave a due diligence to that petition and went over it and tried to compare addresses. Some of the people signed by different names and they were on the checklist. They may have signed under a maiden name and they're under the checklist under a maiden name or a married name. We looked those up and if I was satisfied it was that person, we counted them. I even gave my own signature to the petition before 5 o'clock just to try to bring some of the count up. And because it looked like, you know, that it was going to be close. Another thing that we did in our office is we put through the purge of the names of the people that we no longer felt were here, maybe college students that had moved away, and lowered the count down into the 430 area. So the people who petitioned needed 30 some odd names less. We did everything in our office to see that whoever filed got every benefit of the doubt.
Thank you.
Stu, I've got some questions, if you would. Sure.
Yeah, go ahead before we have questions.
I just want to make it clear that I'm not here to say that Mr. Corcoran didn't do his job. I understand how difficult it is with all of those petitions coming in on one day. And I know that he worked on those and he called me. What I'm saying is we can't provide these services without the town's support. And 33 signatures I could have gotten, but we were able to know because it's a huge process when all of the agencies are submitting petitions and the clerk's office has to go through all of those petitions for all of those agencies. There wasn't a count available. I'm not blaming anyone, I'm just saying I need you to place us on the ballot because we can't do it without that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Kenny, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Just, part of I understand and I do appreciate Tim's efforts and yours. The spirit of the policy, as I understood it, was to make sure that organizations were going back and vetting the amounts that they were asking for, making sure there was community support still. I do feel that you have community support. Can you speak a little bit to how $25,000 came as the amount that you need?
100% of the money that we receive from the town goes back to the town. Almost more than 90% of the people we serve are from Bennington. And the first year, some of you may recall, we asked for a much smaller amount, and that was our first year in the petition. And I heard from everyone that we should have asked for more. And so we did. We get town funding from almost all of the other towns in a much smaller amount, but most of the people we serve are from here. We also petitioned in Manchester and are asking for 3 times the amount that we've been getting from them. And we'll be on that ballot requested because we now have a program there. But all of our programs are based here with the exception of the one in Manchester, and 90% of the people we serve are here.
Okay, thank you.
So do you rely just on the towns for your funding, or do you do other kinds of fundraising?
We do other kinds of fundraising, and we do have state grants, which are dwindling. We get contributions from people from the community and some businesses, fundraisers, grants, and town funds, from all of the towns, but we do rely on the town funds, and our grants are shrinking this year, and so this is just one more hit that we can't afford.
Cindy, can you tell us how many individuals you served?
We sheltered 120, I believe it was 120 or 109 now, last year. So we can shelter up to about 55 people at a time.
And based on the last count, how many homeless individuals are there in Bennington County?
Well, the homeless count happens every January, and it'll be happening the 29th, the night of the 29th, but for the last 3 years, it's been consistently right around 365 in Bennington County that have been identified as homeless.
Can you explain how that process is done?
That's a process with, we do a mass mailing to schools and social service agencies and churches and towns and anyone we can think of that might come in contact with someone experiencing homelessness, and there's a form they fill out, and then it goes through an unduplication process. The state actually does that. They get rid of all of the duplicates because it asks for some data identifiers, identifying elements, and so they're able to remove any duplication. And so it's been 365 for Bennington County for the past 3 years.
And even with the town funding, on a night like tonight, for instance, it's 12 degrees, are we going to be turning away homeless people?
We may very well.
Did we last night?
No, we did not last night. Because of the state's cold weather policy, that helps in that people who might not typically be eligible for assistance would be.
And they're placed in hotels at that point, right?
They're placed in motels, right.
And who pays for that, the state?
The state pays for that, but they make sure that the shelter is full first.
Okay.
If they're single individuals, they have to come to the shelter first. So if we're full, then they will start placing people in motels.
So it's safe to assume that the reason why we didn't take any in last night was because
right.
We were full and
right.
They were placed
We're
elsewhere.
full, yeah.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Any else?
I've got some questions for Stu.
Okay.
On the rules that we adopted October 22nd, would you briefly go over those again with respect to funding?
Basically, the board altered the policy on funding for agencies. Those agencies that had received a positive vote in the past and were asking for level funding requests and whose funding requests were less than or equal to $7,500 could apply to be placed on the ballot by the board, provided that they supplied a certain amount of information. And the information was on the application form. I didn't bring that with me, but it was basically list of board of directors, listing of all town funds that are received, last year's tax return, an audit or a balance sheet at year end, those kinds of things.
In the budget, I think.
Pardon me?
I think the budget, although that's kind of,
right, yes.
I think the budget.
Yep, you're right.
Was Kendi compliant with respect to filling that part of it out?
No, because she fell into the level 2 funding requests. Those agencies that were requesting more than $7,500 and either were not previously funded or exceeded the $7,500 had to petition to be included. We did not require that they submit any information to us if they were petitioning for greater than $7,500.
Okay.
So do we have the power to mandate that either?
Right? Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Now, had she gone ahead and filled out the necessary paperwork, she would automatically be eligible for the $7,500, is that right?
No.
Okay.
Principally because we had one agency, in fact, who started a petition process requesting more than $7,500. They realized before the deadline, which was January 25th, that they weren't going to make it. They had already submitted their application form and all of the necessary information, but simply then came to the board and asked if you would place them on the ballot at $7,500. and you agreed to do so, and I think this was the 2 Saturdays ago. In this particular case, the homeless shelter folks, Coalition for the Homeless, we should get the name right, actually it went beyond the deadline for the application and obviously did not get enough signatures to be on the ballot. So that forces them into the situation they're in tonight, which is to ask this board to waive the policy, the requirements, and place them on the ballot because they haven't done either. They didn't reduce their request and provide the necessary information, nor did they meet the signature requirements.
Yeah, I'm having a real hard time with this one because I think it's going to set a really bad precedent to approve something like this, and I know the Coalition for the Homeless does great work, and normally it would be just a no-brainer to put it on the ballot, but I just feel that we've got another agency that did the same thing, and they're not going to be on the ballot, and anybody that didn't come in with their signatures is going to be here asking us to be on the ballot. So I can't support this, but it's up to the board. So I don't know if anybody else has any other comments.
I'd be willing to make a motion and put it up for a vote. I mean, the spirit of the petition law can go different ways. The coalition has had support in the past. They do good work. I would like to have seen the petition come in earlier, yada, yada. But the reality of it is what it is. And so I'll make a motion to put them on the ballot and ask the people of Bennington if they would like to put $25,000.
And I will second that because I cannot in good conscience say no to this.
Now, remember, we do need 4 positive votes because of majority, so.
Is it a majority?
It's a majority of the board.
Of the board. So it needs to be 4 positive votes. Is there any further discussion before I call the vote? All those in favor? And opposed? Okay, 2 in favor, 3 opposed. Sorry, guys.
I'd like to make a motion that we put the Bennington Coalition for the Homeless on the ballot for $7,500.
I'll second that.
Okay, is there any further discussion on that?
A little bit. What's the total budget of the Homeless Coalition?
This year, it's 130.
What's the ability of the Homeless Coalition to, by the end of this week, get us the information that has been requested of you in the past and has been provided by every other agency that's requested the $7,500?
I have no problem getting you that information. We provide reports every year based on getting approved for funding, so it sounds like it's all the same information. So I have no problem getting that information to you. We didn't do that because we were petitioning.
That the deadline can be extended so that they get another chance to get the required signatures.
That's a statute,
Yeah.
Isn't that correct? It's state statute, so they only have there's a cutoff date for that. Anything else, Jason?
I can only make the following comment out of recollection. My heart goes out to people in need. My heart goes out to people that have to pay taxes. With all due candor and all due respect to those present here tonight, and I realize only 3 of the 5 members sitting here tonight can speak to this because I'm going to reference previous budgets to this year when we had the ability to receive and review information from an array of agencies that wanted to get on the budget without having to file and go through the petition process, which frankly, I think it ought to be noted that the town of Bennington governmentally has bent over backwards to make it easy for agencies to stay on the ballot without the onerous, I used to say 500 in round figures, but as Tim just pointed out a few minutes ago, 430 signatures this year to be placed on the, is it 430 or 420? Is that right? 430 plus or minus. We made a decision this year to alter the policy 90 days plus before the policy, before everything was due last Friday, to say, and in my opinion, it was in recognition of the current economic climate and people's ability to pay taxes and what we're doing, to say, okay, for the lower level requests or anybody who wants to keep it 7,500 or under, we'll continue to make it easy. But if you want the large, big ticket request, big ticket quote unquote, you've got to go through, you've got to go get community support, you've got to do that. Some people get their work done well ahead of time, some people don't, some people wait to the last minute, and that comes with inherent risk. I'm sure this board is unanimous that we want to help people, we want to do things. My point was going to be, my recollection is that in the past, which I'm not going to base my vote on what's happened in the past, but I'll say it publicly now, we've got some very small agencies. Parent Recreation comes to mind, fully staffed by volunteers, a very small budget, but they provide us to the T every year the information we want. And I can't say the homeless shelter's done the same. In fact, my recollection has been, it's been a little bit shoddy, to be quite frankly, over the years, where we get previous year's tax returns and not the current year's, or not the full array of things, and we've managed to just kind of let that slide by, and I've been supportive of that. I haven't voted against keeping them off, but I don't think historically this has been a high-performing agency when it comes to following this board. It's a little bit more sensitive project, but I think it needs to be said from this board, if we set a policy and we're doing it because we're playing with taxpayers' funds to put it on the budget and force everybody to pay into this, that we get the information we are requesting of that entity, like every other entity gives to us. That I can't say with all due respect has happened over the years. I certainly submit that they can use the money. Do they fill a need? Yes, they can. Yes, they do. But I'd like the board to think about something else, too, before you make your vote on this. Senior citizens are some of the most vulnerable people in our population. We have a high percentage of senior citizens in this town. Crescent Manor Nursing Home was here 8 weeks ago on a Monday night because they missed the tax deadline by 1 day. They pay a $15,000, $16,000 a year tax bill. It's a fairly high number. It's bigger than $5,000 penalty. It was a $5,000 penalty for 1 day they missed. We had the ability, if we'd wanted to waive that penalty. We didn't do it because if you waive for one, you waive for all. We set a policy in October with 90 days notice to everybody. Stu, I believe the board directed, and you did send out to all the affected agencies the new policy with all the requested information. We weren't playing games. It was all out front. It was all above board. It was all well advertised.
Jason, if I may, the Crescent Boulevard matter, I do not believe we had the legal right to waive that penalty. That was what my decision was based on. We would have had to waive their entire tax bill, I believe, is the way I read the law.
I don't agree. Frankly, I think it's questionable, though, the way the law is written.
We can set the penalty up to 8% is the way the law reads.
Right.
Towns historically do that.
But it's voted on by the voters. That's a policy.
Yeah, and Greg's right. The way the statute reads at the end there is any alteration has to be done by the voters. So there is a question of whether or not you even had the right to do that. Although in the past, we have brought people to this board, and in some cases, under tremendous extenuating circumstances, a select board has waived those penalties in the past. But the wording of the statute is
because I did consider that in
difficult.
My point is how are you going to you know, how are you collectively going to address people who followed the rules and came back and said, all right, we're going to settle for the 75 and here's the information on time? Or the people who went out and we've already addressed the $25,000 question in the negative and said, okay, we're going to do the work to get the 430 or so signatures on time. And these really aren't questions germane directly to the Homeless Coalition. How's this board going to, you know, at some point when you set a policy for the purpose of protecting taxpayers and setting a standard for people have to meet, at some point you have to enforce that. Otherwise, the policy isn't a policy, it's a thought. And there's a difference.
I agree. Just 1 second, Tim. Anything else?
No.
Okay. Tim, come ahead.
I just, it's not my business here, this is totally up to the board, but I just want to say as clerk, there was the perception by the people that were petitioning, if they didn't make it, they could go on for the 7,500, whether it was fair or not, I don't know, but that was the perception, that if, like hospice started real late, and I know with some of the people that were involved in that, the perception was, well, if we don't make it, we'll just ask to go for the 7,500. And so they did petition, they did make it, but if they hadn't, they felt that the 7,500, because they had been approved before, was there. So
That was,
I'm not sure why that perception would be out there, because I think we were pretty clear that that wasn't the case. But in this particular case, I understand, and it's with a heavy heart, the devastation that this has on the Coalition for the Homeless and the community. This $25,000 has been a pivotal part of this budget, and it also has housed our neighbors, our children. And I can't sit here tonight and say that because of policy that changes constantly. Since I've been on the board, this particular policy has changed at least 4 times. And I hope that what you're saying, you know, the 5 of us here, we are in a situation where we all support the homeless shelter. Those of you who said no to this, I hope that you support the coalition if we remain open in one form or another, whether it's bring your clothes, whether it's write a personal check, but this is an item that has been passed year after year that has the support of not only the people that have gone through it, but the voters.
Chris, I was actually speaking in favor of your amendment, your motion, so.
No, I understand.
That was the perception by a number.
Again, I'm not sure why that is. I've never heard that, and I don't know why someone would think that, because I thought we were pretty clear. However, I'm distraught at this, and you know, $7,500 is better than nothing. I understand that, but and I'm not going to sit here and put the seniors against the homeless or victims of domestic violence against the homeless. Each organization in this town helps and supports every facet of this community, of this government, and this is, as Kendi said, is a situation where it could downsize or close completely without this support. And I can't sit here in good conscience and say no, that this is not going to be put on the ballot.
Okay. Did you want to say something? You need to come up and identify yourself, please, for the secretary.
Beth Wallace, registered voter. To address you, Mr. Morrissey, you're kind of painting this picture of the coalition as kind of banking on getting the signatures, but not really putting in the work, kind of waiting until the last minute, or at least that's the perception from the comments you've made. But it was my understanding that they came to the town office with 120 or 130 extra signatures that ended up not counting. But they thought they had them, and they did that work to get extra signatures. Kind of an aside, to me, this is a call to action, and as someone who works in social services, I know that the vast majority of folks who receive these services are not registered voters. Because of the chaos that has created their situation, they don't vote, they don't register. They may think that because they live in the town of Bennington, they're registered, and I'd be interested to know how many were duplicates, how many weren't actually registered. To me, that says we need to do a better job of getting our citizens registered to vote, because those 33 signatures would be a snap if you went around to the homeless shelters. But I just want to point that out, that they thought that they had met the requirements and done what you asked.
Well, you know, and your comments are fair comments, if I may address them for a moment. And I'm sorry, your name again was?
Beth Wallace.
Beth Wallace. Beth, I certainly don't mean to underscore or lessen the importance of assisting those in need, and how many of us do that as private, and how, you know, some people donate directly to the homeless shelter, some people do it through their church, some people do it through the Salvation Army, some people do it through food cupboards and the like. I suspect everybody in this room supports those who are impoverished in their own way and to their own ability. Part of my point of view, having sat on this board for 6 years, is to recognize there is a component of this part of state law which, in my opinion, this board that I've been a part of and I've supported over the last 6 years to make it easier for various organizations, including the Homeless Coalition, to be on the ballot without going through the process of getting those signatures every year. And the reason we did that was because we felt we were, for a while, saying, okay, let's just not require that, and if they've done this in the past, we'll agree to put them on. We came to a decision unanimously, 7-0, I might add, that said, all right, for a certain strata of requests, we'll continue to do that. For a certain strata of requests, at least in this, the vote was 7-0. I can tell you what my point of view on that vote was that, you know, taxpayers are being asked to do a lot of the time and do more, and it's getting, candidly, more difficult for people to pay their taxes. So let's try to be responsible to those in need. Let's balance that off with being responsible to those who pay their taxes, and try to put forth a strategy that says, hey, the state says there's a state law. We can't, this 5 of us tonight, the 7 of us in total, can't do anything about it. You can go out and get 430 signatures and ask for whatever you want. You're allowed to be on the ballot, and you get to sink or swim with the voters on the town of Bennington. It's worth pointing out some who've passed regularly in the past have recently failed over the last couple of years. One, I'm not going to name it, but one comes to mind. So things change over time. People do watch the amounts that they're requested to pay. And I think, you know, at least for myself, I can say that was part of what went into my thought process last October when we said, let's reassess this. Everybody's more than welcome to come to the party with their signatures, and then they're obviously going to be put on the ballot. You know, I'm sorry you took, obviously my comments could not be categorized as positive. I will certainly concede that. I think they fall more under the column heading of a simple statement of fact than coloring any organization, the one we're talking about tonight in particular, in a negative light. I think it's just simply stating the facts of, here was the policy, here was what happened, and here's the conclusion. You know, that's, you know, I'm inclined to say, let's go for the 7,500, but I would probably say if a vote gets called for it, it'll have my support as well, given the history. I do want to remind the board, though, you know, it's just, it kind of begs the question, what happens when who asks next? You know, I know, Chris, obviously it's been a project you've supported publicly, substantially, I'm sure privately, that's none of my business. And this is something you're very close to. I'll be perfectly candid with you. Even though my father was only in hospice care for the last 3 days of his life, I feel very strongly about the hospital and the hospice organization that they provide. That happened to be one of the predecessor organizations that provided it. But we can't be picking our pet projects.
I understand that, sir, but let me tell you that with that, I had hospice come to my house for an entire year,
I'm
taking
sure you
care of
did.
someone. So I am not picking this one particular project. I'm picking this one particular issue, and that $25,000 is peanuts compared to what it's going to cost this town if this organization closes.
Well, Chris, my point, if you'll let me finish, is simply, at some point, I do think there's a public interest that's served by adhering to a stated policy. I think if we can't agree on that, why have policies?
Well, I feel, I mean, one of the advantages or responsibilities, if you will, of a legislative body is to look at things on a case-by-case basis when issues arise. I mean, I understand the town clerk's office does not have that luxury. You know, they have a policy. The coalition clearly did not meet the muster of the Petition Act because of the duplicates and whatnot. You know, so to appeal to us, I think makes sense to look at on a case-by-case basis and see if we think it's in the best interest of the town to make a decision otherwise.
I've got to weigh in on this a little bit. You know, this is an impossible position. I don't think anyone wants to deny you on this. However, I have to agree with Jason. You know, these rules were set forth, and every other organization abided by them. They complied with them, and they met them. And it's either we as a governing body are going to uphold these rules, or we're paper tigers.
It's not that black and white, and it shouldn't be that black and white.
Well, I think you're wrong, Chris.
Well, take away the name in general of any of these organizations, okay?
Done.
All right, well, let me finish.
Wait a minute.
Just take away the name of any of those organizations. The rules are, if you want 25,000, you need 400 and some odd thousand signatures. Did you get them or didn't you? And I know that's a rather cold analysis, but those are the rules.
Unfortunately, you look at it that way.
Well, I mean, it will set a precedent, and people are going to come back.
We set precedents. I'll be here. Like I said, this has changed 4 times since I've been elected. 9 years, this policy has changed 4 times. This is a serious situation, and I can't believe that you would say no to this. Have you worked with the homeless? Do you understand what is entailed in this? How can you say no because of policy that we set? These are the people that live on the streets.
Because how are you going to handle the next agency that comes to us?
Just the way I just said it.
And says, you know, we need to be on the ballot.
I mean, one of the arguments that was made during the policy was that it's a piece of cake to go out and get 500 signatures and anybody can do it. I've heard from 3 different agencies that that's not the case. So, I mean, that was, you know, and that was my hesitation with that. I thought the $7,500 limit was valid. I thought that, you know, the spirit of vetting these requests on a regular basis was valid. My worry, as I stated, was that it might be an onerous task for organizations that are thinly staffed and lightly subsidized. This seems to be the case. So, you know, as a legislative body, I don't have a problem looking at this and making case-by-case basis, you know, analysis. I understand wanting to stick with policies, you know, and like I said, we don't give Tim and Cassie the leeway to make those decisions. That's our responsibility. So, you know, there's a motion on the floor, and
I've got one more question. What was the amount last year that was on the ballot? Anybody recall?
it was 25,000.
25, yeah. It's been 25 for the last
4 years.
4 years.
And they took the 10% cut last year, didn't they?
Last year they did.
Yeah, they did do the 10% last year. Okay, I have a motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion before I call a vote?
Well, in light of the conversation, I'll just throw in there in my motion that the Coalition for the Homeless submits the form in the packet that we had asked every other organization to show their financials.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Second that amendment.
The amendment.
For 7,500. But I do think for 70, right.
7,500.
7,500. How was it going to agree to 75,000?
I would have fallen over in my chair.
I hope this discussion has pointed out the importance of providing information to legislative bodies that are responsible for shepherding taxpayer dollars. And I'll leave it at that, and I hope it's a message received.
Okay.
And I'm just going to put a call out to the community to get involved in the Bennington Coalition for the Homeless. It's a serious epidemic, and it's affecting our neighbors. It's affecting our children. And if you want to get involved, you can call 442-2424. That's the 6 Bank Street shelter. That is full tonight, I'm assuming, and I'm sure that there are children. They need clothes, they need food. If you want to get involved, 442-2424.
Okay, and with that public service announcement.
I'm sorry, but it has to be said.
I will call the vote. All those in favor of the 7,500? Okay, that's unanimous. All right. Okay, so you'll get that financial information and the packets and stuff to the town office. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is to sign the annual town warning, the 2013 annual town warning, which we have in front of us. Is there any discussion on any of this? If not, I will entertain a motion to accept it as presented.
No, it would have to be accepted as amended.
As amended. Oh, that's right, we have to amend the agencies.
I'd like to find that page.
We'll just add the Coalition for the Homeless for 75.
What I'll do is, if you agree to do that, I'll just circulate the signature page, and then we'll add the Coalition for the Homeless to the ballot.
I'll make the motion to accept that as the warning as amended.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? And that is unanimous. Okay, Stu, you'll circulate that, please. Next item is liquor licenses. And I know it's in here somewhere.
I can circulate this one, Sharon. Basically, there are 3 first-class renewals, 2 second-class renewals, and 2 tobacco license renewal applications. These are all renewals, simply requires your signature.
Okay. Okay, and the manager's report?
I only have one action item on the manager's report, and this is goes to something that we've been talking about with our legislators for years. The League of Cities and Towns has pursued it in the past on behalf of all municipalities who don't benefit by it. There's what they call option taxes that are available to, initially they were gold towns that were offered this opportunity. One is a meals and rooms tax added on to the current state tax of 1%, or a sales tax option at 1%. What I'm asking the board to consider would be supporting our request to our legislative delegation to try to get the law changed to allow municipalities who are not gold towns the opportunity to put the sales tax option, in our case, before the voters. It requires voter approval to move it. In our particular case, we are told that in Bennington here, it would generate about $1.36 million annually that could be used for capital projects, which would reduce the budget on an annual basis, where we continue to try to do over $1 million worth of work. It would have the benefit of allowing us to do those projects. It would have the benefit of allowing us to build perhaps a capital reserve for those instances where we don't have sufficient funds to do a particular project and it needs to be done. All I'm looking for tonight is a motion by the board or consensus by the board to support the legislative change. I know that it has been discussed at the Senate and the House in the past without success.
Didn't we discuss this before? Wasn't Dick Sears here at one point? And this was a few years ago that we discussed this tax.
Yes, but it's a new board, it's a new day.
I mean, I would be in favor of supporting the legislative change if they can get it to go through. You know, why should the gold towns reap all the benefits? I don't know how the rest of the board feels.
Well, the thinking on it, if I can, on this tax, the Gold Town tax, 1%. Manchester, as a case in point, was that Manchester, as a gold town, paid out more than they received.
Yeah, I know.
And Bennington is a receiving town, and that is, we take in more than we pay in. But this, to my mind, would give us an opportunity to pay in more to the state, and for the state to shake their head no, just I find mystifying. It's a 70-30 split, isn't that right, Stu?
That's correct.
So Bennington would get 70% and the state would get 30% of the gross revenues. Is that right?
That's correct. And what the current law requires is that the 30% the state receives actually is placed into the payment in lieu of tax fund, which the state traditionally underfunds because it never has sufficient monies. Bennington is one of those towns that provides a tremendous amount of support to state agencies and buildings which are tax exempt. And by increasing that fund, we would also perhaps see an increase in the payment in lieu of tax portion of that payment that would come back to us. So we would benefit essentially twice if this were passed.
Okay. Any other comments from the board?
I'm not a big fan of raising sales tax, but on the other hand, it wouldn't be a bad option to have at our discretion, should we?
Depending on the dollar.
We decide we need it.
I would just
Depending on the
make
state of
one
the economy.
caveat as I sense we're going to give consensus to do this. I think it's worth exploring, but I think it's worth exploring as a way to take what's been an increasing burden off the property taxpayer, not to provide a largesse of new funds to be spent by the town. We talk a lot of times at the last meeting for the budget, we did it this year, for a $150,000 home, this is just another $45. But there's going to be the school tax, which if you're in the BSD, that's, advertised as a 19% shot. Think about your world, and if you pay taxes, which many do not, each year it's an extra $200, $300, $400. If you own several properties, it's an extra $800, $900, $1,000. And this, should it be brought to light over the next year or two, to the extent we show our support as a way to give property tax relief and not to increase the budget, then let's see where it goes. It may or may not go anywhere, but it never hurts to ask.
Okay, so do we have consensus of the board to move forward with this?
I do.
Yeah.
Support that.
Okay. All right, Stu.
Thank you. And that's all I have tonight.
Okay. Any other business, Jason,
No.
this evening? How about Greg?
Nope.
Okay, Chris?
Nothing.
Just one thing, Stu, that I talked about, I just want to reiterate. And talking with several business owners in town who expressed dissatisfaction with the timely removal of snow from Main Street, and especially the business district. And that's all. Just that they'd like to have that done in a more timely fashion.
I thought we did it incredibly quickly, but we can never please everyone.
And the only comment I have, at the stop signs at the corner of Dewey and Elm Street, there's red strips on
Yes.
is that something new that we're doing, or is that just an experiment?
We did it there simply because people going to the hospital principally, whether they're employees or others who are in a hurry to get there for perhaps emergency situations, tend to run those stop signs. And we've had police officers positioned there. We've got the red flashing lights. We're now trying to do the reflective strip on the signposts, and we're actually looking to look for reflective signs that say stop ahead. I don't know why that particular intersection is difficult, but when the children line up at the bus stop right at the corner of Dewey and Elm, there's a number of children there, and people run that stop sign all the time.
I think it's a great idea. Get your attention, coming down the street.
It's at night.
It does, yeah, it does work at night.
We're
Not
doing
sure
what
how
we-
effective it is during the day. but-
That is the one intersection that we continually see problems with, and we've heard from the people who live in that neighborhood who have children waiting at the bus stop.
Okay. I think it's a great idea. We should do it at more intersections. That's all I have. We do need an executive session for contracts, so I will entertain a motion to go into executive session
So moved.
for contracts.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you. Good night.